Hello, everybody. Ready for a little real estate therapy that you may not even have known you needed? Uh, this is Cynthia Cummins, and I have a very wonderful guest here, an inspiring human being who I can't wait for our conversation. And I'm going to have him, Joseph Cope, introduce himself in just a minute. Um, but I wanted to say that the thing that we're going to talk about, because this is Joseph's area of expertise, is empathy and how empathy can enhance our lives in general, and it can enhance our work as realtors, as business people, as teachers, whatever we're doing. Empathy is really key, and it probably doesn't get talked about enough. And I have this quote by a favorite poet of mine and everybody's, let's face it, Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver wrote, "Attention without feeling, I began to learn, is only a report. An openness, an empathy was necessary if the attention was to matter." So that's kind of the direction that we're heading in. And but would like Joseph to tell you all who he is and what he does. And welcome, Joseph.
Well, thanks, Cynthia. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Joseph Cope, and I'm an empathy and leadership expert. And my purpose in bringing this message to empathy is to redefine empathy as more than the buzzword that it's become. Um, I think when we talk about empathy being something that we need more of, it also gets kind of shoved into that ethosphere of soft skills. And we kind of lump it in with compassion and emotional intelligence and all of those big woo woo buzzwords that are out there right now, right? Like
Or abundance.
abundance and all of those, when you dig down to the heart of them, have such deep meaning and can bring authenticity into your life. But if you just use any of those as a surface word, people get turned off by it really really quickly. So um, as an empathy expert, my purpose is really to redefine empathy as a set of skills so that you can feel the emotions that are coming to the surface, both for you and so that you can hold space with depth for the people that you work with, either who mean the most to you or for whom you're holding or for whom you have a challenging situation at hand.
Right, right. That would be, yes. And that, it really translates into the work of a real estate agent
Yeah.
because, there's this whole idea about fiduciary
Mhm.
obligation,
Mhm.
which means, in a nutshell, means acting and thinking, advising as if I was my client. Like everything I do is to be um, done with them foremost in my mind. And there's a commitment there. And so if there's this, or if an agent thinks they're just selling a house, that's kind of wrongheaded because the fiduciary care sort of goes off to the side. Um, and so this is really rich. And I found that the most successful real estate agents whom I encounter are the ones who've learned how to, um, in almost a methodical way, to up their attending with feeling, their listening, their empathy. But I want to hear more from you about that because, okay, me maybe 20 years ago would have said, I can feel for people. I may be a hysterical, melting mess, right? Who can't think straight, but I sure do empathize. I have feeling. And that was a little wrong-headed. It doesn't mean, running around bursting into tears every time somebody
Mm-mm.
is suffering, because everybody's suffering
Yeah,
in some way.
yeah. I, so there's a couple of things that you said that I think are really interesting. And the first thing that I thought when you said the word fiduciary was, as a non-real estate world liver, right? I thought to myself, "Oh, fiduciary, that's a great buzzword." Right? That's a great word that hits, that people recognize, is that's part of the real estate landscape.
Mhm.
Um, so before I answer your question, though, I actually would like to ask you, how has the word fiduciary changed for you over the course of your real estate career? What you
Oh,
thought it was and what it's become as you yourself as a human have come into your own experience.
that's a great question. And I'm so excited that you asked me that. Um, as a new agent, I thought fiduciary, gosh, that's a big word. I don't really know what that means. And gosh, maybe I don't care. And and there was a lot of, in California, there's a required disclosure where we talk about agency relationships, and what's made plain in this document in writing is what a fiduciary obligation is, right? And
Mm,
so the way that I first understood it was there were certain things that I was supposed to do or not do on
mhm,
behalf of my client. Like if I had a seller, I was not supposed to, I had a fiduciary obligation to them first and foremost. But I also had an obligation to be honest and fair with everyone else I encountered. However, being honest and fair did not include saying to a prospective buyer, "Oh, I think the seller will take less than the asking price." Okay. So that's on a really practical level, that's what it means. But as I grew in my career, I began to understand that there's this beautiful quality to fiduciary that's very different than that. It's sort of about being a fan of the people I'm working for, like thinking they're the neatest, coolest people I've ever met. Like, wow, aren't they amazing?
mm.
And then having my enthusiasm for them translate into witnessing them with compassion and serving them and serving their best interests. That's kind of how it evolved. Does
That's
that answer?
that's beautiful. And the way that that matches with um, the answer to your original question is, anytime that we get handed something as a new skill, for example, the word fiduciary to a new realtor or a new agent, it's all about the requirements. It's about this is what you have to do. This is your fiduciary responsibility. But it's not until you dig into the experience of that and you almost experience, what's the word, fiduciariality? I don't know what that, like, but fiduciariness within
Yes,
yourself from others, right? Or
right.
you experience it within yourself through your own experiences, that you start to get the spirit of what it means to be, to hold that fiduciary space, right?
Yes. In fact, that's the experience of that was the thing that sold me, quote, sold me on my career as a real estate agent, because
Ooh, say
just the
more.
just the idea of selling a house, that was kind of scary and salesy. Like I was a little put off by that idea. And on the very first transaction I did, I was so astounded by the level of concern and care that just arose naturally as I was serving my buyer client, that I was hooked. And I hadn't, before that, I had never really, and it was before I became a parent. that I had never really experienced that deep a level of caring. And it really, I wanted to chase that feeling. I definitely did.
And wouldn't it be nice to be able to lean into that skill and maybe lean into that feeling and not have to hope that you get that feeling? Wouldn't it be nice if that originated from a skill set? And that's where the piece of empathy connects here. Because if empathy is only about a feeling, right? Then feelings are really based on how I feel in the moment or how somebody else is making me feel. And those emotions come to the surface. But if we're not skilled enough to identify how can I elicit empathy from within myself and hold space for someone else, how can I be that spirit of fiduciary in this moment? And that's
Yes.
where that's what we it's really was what I'm looking to bring is, can you turn it into a skill? And maybe the way that I can tell it is I can tell a little bit about my background, which is I'm not a psychologist expert. I'm not somebody who even has a PhD, but I have worked with a lot of people who need really, really intentional interactions in their life. I mean, for 15 years of my life, I was a teacher in the classroom working with kids
Bingo.
between 10 and 14 years old, moving from fourth grade kids who are just peeking into the real world and just starting to identify that the world out there has its consequences, and they start asking the tough questions. They start asking,
Yes.
like, why is this country invading this country, or why did this law get passed, or why are these people not allowed? All of those great questions come up, but they're also sweet enough in fourth grade where if I ask for a volunteer at recess, I got 30 hands to go up in the air, right?
Right.
Those,
Right.
but then you start moving into, in later in my career, I got the opportunity to move into middle school, which is the cream in the middle of the Oreo, the ham in the sandwich, the best part of it, the best part of life, in my
Mhm.
opinion. I fell in love because you just see everything is at the surface, and it's an investment of your soul to spend time and connect with middle school students. Because if you can't give them a voice, you're setting yourself up for failure. So all of those hormonal issues, we're going to say this is a family program, so I'm not going to use alternative language, but there was
Oh,
plenty
go
of
ahead.
there was plenty of it that came out as a result of all that frustration, right? But if I was to come down on them hard and try to get a result out of them changing their behavior, it was never going to happen. So all of that was within me that wanted to connect, now every time that they pushed back was like an opportunity to connect with those kids. And then I got to move into leadership in middle school. So, and then I was on leadership. And then you start realizing, once I got out of the classroom, I started realizing working with a lot of adults is kind of like working with grown-up middle school children. Like, when we get emotionally dysregulated, we start acting like all the things, right? I mean, we start shutting down, blowing up, walking away, passive aggressive. We start throwing middle fingers with our eyes. Like, it gets all over the place. And the thing was, middle school kids were actually a whole lot easier to connect to because they were more receptive to the connection than adults were. And that's where I really had to lean into the skills that I was taught as a middle school teacher.
Yes, I there's so much about that that really resonates
Yeah.
for me. And the thing that struck me was this about leaning into the connection,
Mm-hmm.
because whenever what I've seen in kids, I was never a teacher. My parents were both educators,
Yeah.
um, but uh, whenever there's conflict or disagreement or things aren't going our way, the tendency at that moment is, like you said, to shut it down. Let's shut it down. I want to run away. I don't want to be anywhere near you. I'm feeling in distress. How can I take care of myself? If that means punching somebody, great. If that means having a little hissy fit,
Mhm.
okay, fine. But a lot of times people don't have the skill set to say, wait a minute, this is a great opportunity for connection.
Mhm.
This is a moment for a deeper understanding.
Mhm.
I mean, an example would be in a real estate deal where suddenly there's bad news about um, the the refrigerator's not included in the sale. Okay, that would be a great a moment for somebody to flip out,
What?
make me the enemy,
Right.
right? And so I get to step into the enemy role for a minute, but with that, bring with me this feeling that, yes, there's a conflict and there's an upset here. I'm going to hear you and I'm going to be here for you. We're going to work it out
Mhm.
instead of running away or getting in a fight or blaming the other agent or um, having the presence of mind to take a deep breath and
Yeah. And it's and you know what, Cynthia, the challenge is that empathy isn't just about connection. Because if it was just about connection, I would just call it connection, right? Really, when we talk about holding space for someone, especially when they're in a dysregulated place, or we need them to shift their mindset just a little bit. Like with middle school kids, it's very, very big, right? Or it can be very, very intense or shut down. That manifests itself in some of these smaller deals where all of a sudden we sense that there's the discomfort and we know that as the whether it's the social leader, and when I call leader, like I mean there's leaders at every stage of life. Like
yes,
in the case of like a realtor and a potential client, right? At different points in a relationship, both of you are going to play the role of leader. But in this case, what I'm saying is whoever the emotional leader in that moment is, meaning you have clarity in the moment of what's taking place.
mm-hmm.
It's your responsibility to lean into those skills to hold place for the person who has the potential or is already emotionally dysregulated. And that's the
Yes,
part where it does take skill and it takes intentionality beyond just saying, "Hey, I see that you're upset." Right? That's a really good starting point.
yes.
That's a great, and I don't know, Cynthia, I don't know if this is a good time to introduce the cargo model that I'm introducing to people around because it feels like connection is the place to start.
Yes, I think this is a good time to talk about cargo. And yes, just the recognition of that moment
Yeah,
is so important. And that's a step that takes some practice to
it
figure
is.
out to notice. It's just like in a Buddhist practice.
Mhm.
Notice what's going on here.
Right, right.
Because a lot of times we can't find that within ourselves. We cannot summon it up. We're too in the moment, and at the same time we are not at all in the moment. We may not even be in our bodies at
Mm-mm.
that moment. Anyway,
Mm.
I'd love to for you to talk more about that.
Yeah. Well, but I will hit cargo, but I do want to sit in something that you just said, which is to be aware in the moment. Our default as human beings is to mirror the higher emotion
I like that. Yes.
because those mirroring neurons that are firing in our brain are looking for emotions to mirror back. And so the higher the emotion, our brain's default is to go into that space. And you think about it, high emotion mirrors high emotion, which mirrors high emotion. And now we've got a power struggle, an argument, a blow up, a walk out the door, unless somebody's willing to be aware enough in that moment and be curious enough to ask, why am I feeling this way? Is it because of me or something else?
Yeah, this is Yes. I mean, the dynamic with my partner is right.
Absolutely.
He's angry. I'm upset. He gets a little angrier.
Yeah.
I get a little more upset. He wants to shut down and run away. I
Right.
chase him across the house, right? Banging on the door. I'm joking a little bit. It's we've been together long enough that we've begun to find our patterns and not go right into that.
But you
But
remember early in the relationship where, because I
oh,
know, listen, I'm married, and there would be times where like she would say, I just don't want to talk about it. I need some space. I'd be like, no, we need to talk about this now. Like we're gonna
right,
work this right now. We're gonna fix this. We're gonna
right.
take care of it. Right?
Yes, you
Yeah.
and I we're alike that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in those moments, though, Cynthia, is where the somebody has to make the choice to be the emotional leader, right? And whoever is more skilled is going to have the awareness to make that choice. And this is what I teach my clients initially when we're talking about interpersonal relationships. I teach and train and coach my clients in how to carry the right, what I call cargo, into challenging moments. And cargo stands for 5 things on the finger. So the C stands for connection. Connection is just, I'm going to take my power hat off and we're just going to connect as humans. So in the case of the fridge, it's, yeah, I know it's frustrating that the fridge wasn't included. I'm really sorry that that wasn't clear from the beginning. I'd be really frustrated too. It feels like the rug got pulled out from under me as well.
Mhm.
Human connection, right? At that, it's just, and that has to be authentic. It can't be contrived. It can't be based on a document of what your fiduciary responsibilities are. It has to be
Right.
human to human connection, right? Then the A stands for accountability. And accountability in this place is I'm holding myself accountable to my own values.
Mhm.
Before I make my values imposed on somebody else, I need to hold myself accountable to my values. The reason for that is because if I impose my values on you, they all of a sudden start to feel like rules of life or rules of this conversation, and they feel like they're constraining, and now I've taken autonomy out from that other person. Whereas if I can be accountable to my own values, now I'm the one holding myself accountable to me and what I believe in as a human.
Can you give can you give an example of how
Of
that
course.
might play out? I mean, it doesn't have to be the refrigerator scenario,
Of
but
course.
um,
The accountability piece oftentimes is something that's reflective within myself, right? So
mm,
if I'm going into that refrigerator conversation, right, I know that one of my values is compassion. I'm a compassionate human. So I'm going to hold myself to that compassionate. So in my tone, in my approach, even in that initial response, gosh, I'm sorry that the refrigerator wasn't included. That was a real surprise. That sucks. It really sucks. And I want to take ownership for what I can in it, but it would be frustrating for me too.
okay,
But giving that space, right? Because what you're modeling in that accountability is you're modeling your value to that person. Because remember those mirroring neurons, right? They're
right,
going to model back whatever that value is. If you think about that value as a skill or an emotion or a trait, gets modeled back by our holding that space.
yep,
Does
yep,
that help clarify?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. So then the R stands. Go ahead. Let me go through them, and
yeah.
then
You go
unless
through them, yeah.
yeah, so the R stands for resistance. And the resistance, again, is what is the resistance to the connection? What is the resistance to holding the accountability, holding the value, right? Ultimately, really, the resistance is just the behavior. It's an indicator of what the problem is in that moment. In that
Mhm.
moment, the resistance might have been, oh my God, the refrigerator wasn't included. What the hell? Like, I thought that we had an agreement on this. Like,
Right, it'd be
everything
like,
on the website said that, like, there's pictures of the fridge in there. Why is it not included? Right?
right.
That is resistance, which is just an indicator.
Okay.
I like to joke that the resistance is on the middle finger for a reason. Like, because if we start with the resistance, that's what it comes across as, right? If I didn't start with a connection, or if I didn't start with something different, and we come in with this, oh boy, it can get ugly. And then the G stands for gain. The gain is actually where this is where skill comes in, because the gain is not to me as the leader. The gain may not even be to the greater good. The gain is to you, the recipient in this conversation. The gain is to you, who I'm holding space for. I just did a short TEDx like talk for a university locally here, and um, described it like this: that if I walked into my local grocery store and I had a pocket full of Mexican pesos,
Mhm.
even though I wanted to buy tortillas and beans, they would look at me and say, it's the wrong currency. Just like if I went to a little shop in Mexico and asked for a hamburger and brought my American dollars, they would be like, you need pesos. You have to spend in the currency that has value to the recipient. And the gain is what is valuable to them. So in this case, right, the gain with the refrigerator might be something like, I know it's frustrating. I know that it's frustrating to not have it. That's our connection. But the gain might be, but I'd love to help you find one that matches your budget. I'd love to be able to
Mhm.
work with you together to find this, because this problem sucks. And
Right.
we're gonna get through this together. That could be the gain. I wish that I could say there was a magic gain statement for every single person, but the reality is that we're all different and we all have different currencies that we spend in. So how do you know the gain? That's why the connection is so important. Right?
Right.
So like in the realtor's world, that's where all of those pre-sale conversations, getting to know you, what makes you tick, what do your kids do, how old are your kids, what's your all of those questions are, in the event that something comes up, I can speak to a gain that's in your currency.
Yep.
And then that leads us to the O, which is the outlook. And the outlook is just, is the, and we're going to call it this, the outlook determines, I'm going to determine what's the readiness for change. And by change, I mean, is that resistance coming down, right? Is that resistance, are we able to hold the space? Readiness for, if the readiness for change is high, that means that one of two things: our skill set coming in, we did really well, like we held space really really well for them because their readiness for change is high. If the readiness for change is low, it could mean one of two things. It could mean we still need to be reflective about our skill of how to hold space,
Mhm.
or it could also just mean that it's not the time to change right now. It could just mean maybe we need to push a pause on this button right now, and let's agree to come back to it later. But if this is something, if the readiness for change is low, the emotions might just be too high. They might have really, really wanted that fridge. Like that might have been the brand that they've been looking for years, and it was included in the house. And all of a sudden, now
Right.
you just took it away from me, and now I got to go buy something secondhand. I don't want that, right? Like
Right.
those pieces are where it is. So that's the cargo model. So when we talk about carrying cargo in, I like to coach my clients on carry the right cargo into the challenging moments and remind
Right.
yourself of what it is that you're bringing into that moment.
It's I'm going to be practicing this. Um, I in this very moment I have a couple of different. Well, in real estate, there's always this. This comes up throughout the transaction, before, during, after. There's always some little. Um, I would love to think that it would be just as smooth as like going down a water slide. It's not. There's
Mhm.
always some grit, or your foot gets caught over in the corner where there's a little gap, or you flip over and go in head first. This is my water slide metaphor.
I
It's
love it.
never it's never like, wee, here I go, everything's fine. There's always something. And for me, the one thing that really stands out is the idea of resistance.
Mhm.
And with my what I call my sloppy Buddhist practice, um, to me, one of the things I really have to watch out for is, or the thing that I practice is, when resistance comes up, is to recognize that as the moment when I get to choose how I'm going to be. Am I
Mm,
going to resist this, or am I going to be with this reality? So,
mm.
in the refrigerator example, I might just be going, oh shit, I can't believe
Yeah.
it'll be like this. I can't believe this happened. And then
Yep.
I run to the contract to see, did I include it in the personal property? And oh, yes, I did. So now it's the other agent's fault. And, I go through all this thing. My resistance is I don't want to be suffering. I don't want to have the pain of this moment. But if instead I go to myself, okay, the refrigerator's not included as far as the seller is concerned. I need to just be with this. This is the reality. I'm not going to twist and turn and escape this moment. And I think maybe resistance is where I am in the cargo. I'm at the middle finger in my ability to navigate these moments. Um,
Well, that's really reflective of you to recognize, because oftentimes if we get stuck in the resistance as resistance, it feels like a middle finger. But if we can consider that resistance is just the indicator in the space for growth, it's the indicator of what space has the potential to be opened. It's the indicator of the need that hasn't been met in some way, shape, or form.
this has become really, uh, I love that because as I'm managing my team members and
Mm,
mentoring them, other agents, there's a lot of these moments where they are in this upset resistance moment. Like, and there's all of the flailing about, like, how could this happen? Why didn't I know this? Who, who said it has to be this way?
mhm,
Why me? And as an objective, empathic listener, mentor, I'm able to see it in them. And I have recognized that at that moment, I am able to step into that skill set of this is distressing for them. Um, and I can see their resistance. And this is where I'm going to connect with them
mm.
to assure them that I'm with them, I'm listening, I'm witnessing, I'm
Yeah.
here. Um,
And this is one of, okay, so I want you to think about this, Cynthia. If if we have the cargo model in front of us, right? If you took out connection and gain, that's the old way of dealing with problems. This is what you're doing wrong. This is how I need you to be held accountable. Now go fix it.
right.
The outlook for that is going to be one of compliance for some people who are raised in a compliant way. Compliance doesn't always mean great work, though. Low
No,
motivation, right? It work talks about, and then if there's people who are that resistant, then you might lose good people because you came at it as the leader the wrong way. With you held accountability like rules, and all they felt like was a middle finger was coming at you the whole time,
exactly.
right? But
Yeah,
when you can couch it within connection and put connection, and then accountability becomes on you as the leader, not on them. You're modeling your value for them, and then the resistance just becomes an indicator. It's almost like it's a non-factor.
right.
But then if we just stopped there, though, and if we didn't have the gain is like, it's like the foundational piece of, it's like the depth of connection. Because connecting at a human level is I see you, I hear you, I value you, right? Or maybe it's just I see you, I hear you.
Yeah, I see you. I
Yeah,
see you is so important.
right.
Yeah,
But then the gain is I value not just what you're saying, but I value who you are and how you live your life. And the gain piece is where, that's where people will come out. And the gain is really where you're going to see that readiness for change just go, because now you're going to have your mentees who before might have said, man, that Cynthia, like, she really gets me. Like, she's super nice. She is always aware of when my birthday is. She knows when I'm going through a hard time. Like, she's given me the gift cards when she's needed to. And we've done some really cool connecting things together. But there's sometimes that I just feel like she doesn't get me.
Mhm.
And maybe it's because of a generational gap, or maybe it's because of like, and they could call it all those different things. But then when you as a leader start to leverage that connection into currency that they speak in those challenging moments, that's where we cross the bridge of, oh, now I trust Cynthia. Now
Right.
I can be even more vulnerable with Cynthia. Now I want Cynthia to be the one who leads me to the promised land, right? Like, those are all pieces of that. It's because, so it's more than connection. It has to have depth to it for the readiness to change to be adjusted.
I have loved this conversation. And now, I don't know if you remembered, I'm sure you did,
Yeah.
that what I like to do at toward the end here is
Hmm.
have a real estate story, and it doesn't have to be in on topic here.
Yeah.
It's just that there's so many great real estate stories, and I would love if you have one that you're willing to share with us today.
Yeah, and I think this is more of the we're gonna call this like the reflective, how I wasn't as empathetic as I could have been in the space of like pre-refined skill, definitely before I was an empathy expert. So in 2015, our family moved from Southern California to West Texas,
Mhm.
and we stayed with some friends for about 3 months. And on one of my wife's walks out in the neighborhood, she noticed that there was just a little sign that said for rent on a house that was just down the street. So she knocked on the door, inquired, and she realized that there were people that were working on the house, right? So she knocked on the door, and a man opened and said, "Actually, you know what? It's not just for rent. I'm actually selling the house. I was just seeing if somebody wanted it, if there was interest in the house, but I'm actually going to be selling it eventually."
Mhm.
And we had never owned a house before. I mean, our first 10 years of marriage were in Southern California at the boom of it. And I was a school teacher. And so we couldn't afford to
Yeah,
own a house in SoCal, right? And
right.
so this is our first home buyer opportunity. And we looked over, and once we found out that the guy was flipping the house. And so once they found out that we were potentially interested, we went in and said, "Hey, look, we'll sign some papers with intent to buy. Um, but there's some things in the house that if you're doing things, would you mind doing them the way that we want them?" Right. So we ended up having some say, and there was some reciprocity in the deal, and things happened, and we signed papers of intent, but never gave any money. So we got a whole wall taken out. We got to have things moved around. We got to choose. My wife got to choose the color of carpet and the color of paint in the house. And so she felt like she had a part in it. Well, the day came when it was right around Thanksgiving, and we were still staying with our friends. And so our friends kind of looked at us and were like, "Hey, you've been with us for about 3 months. It's Thanksgiving coming up. We've got some family coming in, so we're gonna need you to be out." And
Mhm.
so we said, "Well, okay." The house was close to being completed, so we went down to the guy and said, "Hey, listen, if we move in, are you good with like finishing up after we make the payments?" He's like, "Sure, no problem." We go to the title lender, sign all the papers, get things up, and you know the end of the story, right?
Well, I know of several alternative endings that could all be equally horrific, but you tell
Remember,
me.
this is not a good empathy moment. This is not an empathy leadership moment. Let's just say that he came back twice to just fix up small things. And for the next 2 years, we were so resentful about the fact that he just up and bounced that we left things unfinished just so we could share them with friends coming in. Oh my gosh, can you believe this? Can you believe? Look at the what he did over here. Can you even believe that he? One time, this is how bad it was, Cynthia. One time, I was pulling out. I can't remember if it was like a waffle iron or something out of the wall, and the whole outlet came out of the wall, and behind it he had stuck a wood chip in to keep it in place.
I love it.
I literally pulled it out, and I literally was in a what the is going
Right.
on? How could you put wood? Like, I'm not an electrician, and I know I must
Right.
look.
This looks
Oh,
wrong.
it looks very, very wrong. So finally, I think after about 2.5 years, my wife and I looked at each other. We're like, "This is ridiculous. Like, we've been complaining for 2.5 years. Can we do some of this stuff to get fixed?" So we ended up, doing the things that needed to get. But it was, I mean, it was like a treasure trove is the wrong example, but it was like you'd find like mouse droppings everywhere, right? Like
Right.
you'd like leave rat turds, and I say that metaphorically. Like you said, unfinished this, unfinished that, didn't finish this paint here, only did primer on this door, and it was like the money's coming, gonna get things done, and I'm walking out the door.
Like
Exactly.
I know here at my house, my partner, we had a contractor who did some shoddy work, and 2.5 years later, he's still pointing it out to our friends. Like, can you believe this? Can you believe that? Look at this. Come out here. I want to show you. and and there's something kind of satisfying about that. It's a
A little
little
bit,
itch that
a
we can
little bit.
scratch. But
Yeah,
I
I
love
get it.
that story. I think that story was perfect for our episode. Um,
Wonderful, wonderful.
well, thank you so much, Joseph. Can you tell people? I'll put this in the show notes, but can you tell people where they can find you?
Absolutely. So the best way to get in contact with me is on LinkedIn. I'm Joseph Cope. You'll see my face here. A lot of the business and a lot of the clients that I pick up, a lot of my posts will resonate. I mean, Cynthia, that's how you and I initially connected. Was
That's exactly right. Yes.
something that I put out there, you reacted to, and we just started a connection. And so I realized that the work that I do isn't for everybody, but if something that I spoke about resonates, reach out on LinkedIn. I work with, I have different ways that I put my message out there. Um, I'm a keynote speaker. I'm a public speaker. I get paid to speak around the country with another area in education. So I'm a speaker. I'm also a coach, and I'm an executive leadership coach around empathetic leadership. And those are all
Great.
areas that I feel like the footprint of empathy needs to be brought into.
Well, I look forward to our future interactions. I've enjoyed this conversation, and thank you again. And we'll say goodbye.
Goodbye. Thanks, Cynthia. This was a pleasure.
Thanks.